I was really pushed into white spaces and a feeling of whiteness. I was always Asian when it was convenient, but also was very brainwashing.
Either act or conform to whiteness.
In an effort to not be racist, you pretend to be colorblind, but really that just erases people's experience and their identities.
I looked Asian enough to be assaulted.
Ooh, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kels.
And welcome to the show.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer. In today's episode, we're venturing into the intricate tapestry of the mixed race experience. We'll explore the common struggles of not feeling a sense of belonging to either racial group and navigating feelings of isolation and alienation. Our conversation will touch on managing family dynamics, the distinction between passing and authentic identity, the impact of unfair assumptions and stereotypes, and how all of this ties into our understanding of queerness.
Joining us today is Kelcy Timmons Chan, who uses they, them pronouns. They are a Cantonese-Canadian-American queer pop artist and a mural painter. In their practice, they explore community, duality, and belonging through their whimsical style of little purple people, food, and optically illusionistic architecture. Kelcy's focus in their work is to promote and support local businesses in queer community spaces, while also exploring their mixed identity and their connections to these communities. Kelcy, welcome to the show. The first category that we want to get into is a sense of belonging and managing family dynamics. So let's get right into it. A common experience for mixed race folks is this feeling like you don't fully belong to either racial group and struggling with a sense of isolation and alienation. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this experience from your own personal perspective.
So a bit of context. I was born in Hong Kong. I immigrated when I was 4 years old to Vancouver. And then I grew up there entirely. But all of my dad's family is in the States, and all of my mom's family is Cantonese in Hong Kong. And so this sense of home and race and culture is all mixed and all confusing. And I have always felt a sense of displacement in all three. And so for me, feeling isolated was within my own family, in school and spaces, in culture, in every way that I could think of. And yet, when I talk to other mixed folks, it's not everyone that feels that way. It's often something that I connect with people, but mostly something that I kind of learn about with myself. And so tackling those feelings of isolation in friend dynamics, if I was in a group of Asian folks, I tended to feel like the white one or the one that was considered out of place because of that reason. With white folks, I was either the butt of the joke or considered not enough to be Asian. So people would be racist in front of me, thinking that it wouldn't bother me. Or if racism came up, no one considered me as a person that would be offended. Exactly. And so it was really uncomfortable at times for that reason. And yet I also I have a lot of privilege in that sense where I was able to avoid a lot of stuff because of that. But particularly my isolation I found was within my own family. And so we would go to Hong Kong a lot growing up, and that kept me somewhat connected to them. And yet we would come and I can't communicate with any of my Cantonese cousins. And so I'm more close with a lot of my friends than I am with my own family. There was this disconnect there. It would be things like my kaofu and my buguo. They would say oh, we got your family the fried rice, and we got you the food that you can't eat because you're not going to like our food. We were thankful for things like that. It was also, there was a lot of discomfort around that because I wanted to be accepted, and a lot of the ways people feel culturally connected to their family and their community is through food or their language, and I feel distant from both of those. So definitely have felt isolated in where exactly I do belong if it's not one or the other. And so I've really developed this strength in finding a belonging in both at all times, and that's really what I run with in my work and my life.
You spoke to this experience specifically of feeling the sense of not belonging among other full Asian folks, especially in terms of friend groups and those kinds of things, either growing up or maybe still now. Would you be able to speak to that a bit too?
One thing specifically was language. When I was in high school growing up, I was hanging out with a lot more white kids because of language. And so everyone who immigrated later than me and spoke their native tongue, they kind of formed their own community because that's who they felt comfortable with. It's people, they understood them. And yet I wasn't like those kids. And so I was really pushed into white spaces and a feeling of whiteness. And I also embraced it because people praised me for that. They wanted that out of me. It would be backhanded compliments, you don't understand, your struggle's not as hard. In my white friends, they would be like, oh, but you're not like one of those quiet Asians. Like, you're so much cooler than them. You're outgoing and you're like really fun to be around. And the first thing that would always come to mind is the people that you don't consider outgoing. It's like they just know English differently because they moved here 3 years ago when they were 13 and like they're completely adapting to a new culture. It's like traumatic to have to do that, especially when you're like a tween. So being compared to people like that and having it be seen as a compliment was really interesting. Or like a lot of people, this is kind of weird, but people praise me for my lack of body hair growing up. They were like, oh, what a great thing. Like I was always Asian when it was convenient. And so if I was smart in math, it was this. Given those behaviors from people because of something I couldn't control was like very frustrating, but also like was very brainwashing. So I was stuck in these norms and these situations for years until probably around 2020. And I kind of got a bit of a different feeling when there was like a really strong rise in attacks on Asian folks across the world because of COVID. So that really kind of changed my experience with my Asian identity and how I move forward. It stems from that moment specifically.
How did it change your experience and your outlook on it?
So my mom is really close with this man who is kind of the generation up from her. We call him Gong Gong, which is the term for grandfather in Cantonese. And he was attacked on the streets of Vancouver. He was pushed to the ground and he got a head wound. And when that happened, I got very fearful about whether or not I looked Asian enough to be assaulted. And my ex-partner at the time, he was like, oh no, but like you're not, like that's never going to happen to you. And it was a moment of degradation again, oddly enough at his Christmas dinner table, his father said something to me that like really, really fucked me up. He was like talking about people who are half native and half white. And he was like, oh, they're not really actually either. They're really like somewhere in this awkward in between. Like they don't really have any sense of culture of either because they're just not fully belonging in either. And he's like not even talking to me. He's having his own conversation with someone else. And I just broke down crying because I felt so unseen in that family at the time. And it was very scary to feel like so alone in that moment where like nobody in that room understood that I am fully both at all times. It's not a half. It's not something I can cut away. It's not something that changes in the moment. It's really about how I interact with people based on how they interact with me.
There's so many layers there that actually I relate to quite a few of them. And I think that it's so fair and justified to like be confused, traumatized, and to even now have the knowledge to understand that looking back at some of like, whether it be actions or comments and stuff like that, understanding like where they were coming from, but also knowing that some of that wasn't okay.
It's really hard to have a sense of empathy for a lot of people I grew up with because I contributed to the problem at that point in my life. Like I really embraced whiteness growing up because it worked better for me. It got me better opportunities. Like in this past year, I actually got my name formally changed to Kelcy Timmons Chan. Previously it was Kelcy Timmons. My Cantonese name was never listed on my passport. And so for a very long time, there was not actually any part of my physical identity that felt Cantonese because I didn't speak my language and because I didn't live in Hong Kong and these things. And this sense of displacement, I don't think is only within people that are mixed. I think immigrants experience it a lot. And like one of the points and shift for me in learning that was when I spoke to my mom maybe 2 years ago or so. And she said, oh, but I'm not Chinese like them. Like I'm different because I'm here. It's not the same. Like I'm not Chinese.
About herself or about you?
About herself. And I was like, you have two parents from Guangzhou and like you're a full immigrant and you lived there for the first 35 years of your life. Like how could you not be full? But like I grappled with those same feelings. And so I had an understanding of like, I know why you feel this way, but I didn't know it went as deep as it does into people that don't even have multiracial parents. So I've really opened that up to like the immigrant experience and the mixed race experience is similar in a lot of ways. And like I've been able to connect with a lot of people on both avenues because of that.
How does it affect your relationship with your family on both sides?
I haven't seen my Cantonese relatives in a long time. And I think there is definitely an absence in me of Cantonese culture because of that, because I don't have like a huge interaction with them. And then with my other side, a lot of them live across the states. And so where we all get together at our family reunion every other year is Kansas City in Missouri. And it's very wholesome. It's very Southern. It's lovely. And yet it's very white. And I actually learned recently, my aunt and my Oma, my grandmother, she didn't really see me as a mixed race person or an Asian person. I came out to them, which was a very big deal. And I started with coming out as biracial. And I didn't know I needed to do that until
you're like, duh.
Right? And yet, like, I did it anyways because I think that a lot of people, there's an element of like not seeing color. And because I look the way I do, I think that was like even stronger. And so that was very interesting to me. Like, yes, so I am Asian. I was born in Asia and my mom is Asian. And like, if you forgot, I am Asian.
All together now,
also
Asian.
Yes. And also, because I'm related to all of you, I am also white. Yes, confusing. We love that.
We love that.
I came out by using one of my egg prints. And I was like, well, the reason why I paint eggs is because of this. And like the kids are like, like it was very intense. And long story short, it was a very wholesome and lovely experience. And because the queerness element was the part I was actually worried about. So that went very well. But in terms of presenting me as a fully mixed person, I think that was a great way to go about it because it gave full picture.
That lens to whiteness and the way you're saying, though, is like so many people, especially the generation older than us, it's like in an effort to not be racist, you pretend to be colorblind. And that was what a lot of people did. But really that just like erases people's experience and their identities. But it's like a lot of white people in their privilege, they just decide to just ignore something as being there. And it's like, if we just ignore it, then you feel the same as us. But it's like, not really, because you're not seeing me as a full person in my whole experience because it is different than yours, you know?
Absolutely. And like people definitely read into the media and stereotypes they've learned.
You mentioned a couple of times of like having leaned into your whiteness growing up, but I'm wondering if you ever tried to hide some of your racial identity kind of in that process and what those things might have been.
It wasn't something I needed to do. Like I, for the most part, was not called out on it, if that makes sense. Like I had a very traumatic moment where I told someone my Cantonese name and they made fun of it. And then I didn't tell people for like 10 years. But other than that, like not really explicitly hiding my racial identity. No, I was always quite proud. Yeah.
That's good. I didn't.
Did you ever?
Well, yeah. Like, obviously, I can't change the way I physically look. But I did try to, like, either act or conform to whiteness. Like, I wanted to be white when I was younger. And I was like, man, like, even, like, silly stuff. Like, why can't my hair be straight? And, you know, like the white
That's
people.
not silly. There's so much pressure in society to like conform to these
Why
ideals.
can't I, like, I don't want to tan. I don't want to be in the sun because then I'll be less white. Having thick eyebrows. Like, that was too much. I hated my eyebrows. I was like, well, the white kids don't have thick eyebrows. Like, fuck, why can't I just be white? And, like, I would try to act white, dress white, whatever that meant to me at the time. And conform to whiteness just to like try to fit in, especially being an immigrant kid. All you want to do is just fit in. It's interesting to hear that like people chose to treat you white because I think I had to try pretty hard to get them to treat me white.
There's huge privilege in my experience, and I try and like remind myself but also other people of that as well, not that they don't know. Like, I think it needs to be said by me because I recognize I avoided a lot of brutality and bullying because of that reason. Like there was one kid in grade 7 for like grade 7 to grade 12, he was called essentially like extremely rude version of his name in a way to just bully the crap out of him. And so I didn't tell anyone my Cantonese name because I was like, oh, if I do, that's going to happen immediately. And yet it feels different because like you can't hide your skin, you can't hide your hair. Like it's just not the same. I am very whitewashed. I use that term like a lot. And yeah, I like feel a lot of shame for that now.
Hold that thought because this podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer.
That's right. And the ones that we were drinking in this episode is from their new launch, which is Vizzy Hard Seltzer Max, now with 7% alcohol. And they have vibrant new flavors like papaya pineapple, dragon fruit mango, blueberry white peach, and passion fruit kiwi.
Love it. And they all taste super good. And as always, we recommend if you are a hard seltzer drinker that you support a brand that you know also supports the queer community. And now back to the episode. What do we all think is most important, how one passes or their actual identity?
That one is a tricky one. It's very tricky because there's so many white passing immigrant people. And in my experience, especially if you're a fresh immigrant and you're white passing, you don't want to be called white.
Well, because you're not.
Because you're not, first of all.
Yeah.
And second, it completely erases the entirety of their lives.
Well, it erases the amount of marginalization that you experience on like a systemic level, especially just in terms of like the immigrating experience, but then also that experience of colonization as well. I do think, though, being white passing does come with its privilege, and it is important to recognize it, though, because there are people who are a lot more dark-skinned. You know, and their experience is going to be a lot more marginalized in the same way that Kelcy was saying that your experience was harder than their experience. It's like
I wouldn't
there
say
is,
harder.
But different in a way where like systemically there's more
barriers.
more stacked against you.
You can't hide it.
I started talking to my dad a lot about this in the last couple years because he is very privileged. He's white. He's also incredibly nice and successful. But like privilege is something we really, really struggle to have conversations about. How I described it to him, I was like, I have never walked down the street and have someone cross the street because they saw me coming. And I can't imagine you have ever had the same thing either. I don't know if that landed or not, but like that is how
true.
I,
I'm
that is racial bias.
Yeah.
Exactly.
White
and
people
like,
approach me.
Yeah. And like I have always had that. Like I need to recognize that. And like another example is like my name for the longest time. I didn't have trouble with like forms because like I didn't have a name that was flagged, you could say. A lot of Asian folks I know, it'll be like their white name, their actual name, and then their surname. Or actually in Chinese culture, your surname comes first. But a lot of people when they come to Canada, they have to like birth a new name for themselves because people are like not willing
They can't even
to
pronounce
say
it.
it, even when it's so simple. Again, another sense of duality where a lot of people in their life call them their actual name, and then a lot of people call them this name that they had to compromise a sense of themselves so that white people could include them in things. Like that is something I've never experienced. And so like that, I think it needs to be said.
Just even like in my dance crew, there's so many Asian people. Every single one of them has a Canadian name.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not their name.
Yeah.
There's another name.
No.
Yeah.
It's just
That's what we
easier.
call them though.
It just kind of shows like the English North American kind of privilege. Like if we were to go immigrate somewhere in Asia, you would never change your name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't happen,
No,
vice versa.
but they're like, oh, I'm here now. I have to give
to.
them what they want.
Or I literally cannot exist in the system that is Canada.
And kind of like going back to, I guess, like the base of this question is like, what's more important, the way you pass or your actual identity? I think kind of where I came to that, even just when I was writing this question, is I feel like your actual identity is the most important thing to yourself. But in terms of how you pass, I think that can be the most important when it comes to like social situations, to so many other aspects of society. It's like, it's how you're perceived, the opportunities that you receive, the friends that you make, the connections you make, like all of these different paths. It can, I guess, lead to that. So I feel like it can, I don't know, trick question, can be both.
How you're perceived is such a strong factor because it dictates a lot of your life path. And so like that, as much as it is important, I don't think it's the most important.
But also like how you're perceived dictates the experience that you have in life, which also forms your identity as well along the way.
Yeah, very layered.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next section that we want to move into is all about perceptions and stereotypes. So I'm wondering what assumptions you think some people have about mixed race individuals that you believe to be either unfair or incorrect, and if we can kind of like chat about them.
I think that, and this is quite common with any identity, but the sense that we're a monolith. One thing I talk about in my art is that being mixed is so unique. Like not only do you have two separate cultures and many mixed people, like when I find a mixed person who has the same mix as me, it's like
Rare.
It's wild. It's so exciting. Yeah. And yet even that person will have an entirely different perspective and experience to me. Considering mixed folks a monolith is very frustrating and something that happens that I have also contributed to, but something that happens to me a lot where some people assume that I prefer one side or that I'm more like one side. And then like there's words, like there's a whole variety of words to describe mixed folks, like halfy and for Asian people specifically, Wasian. I hate the word Wasian. I don't even know why. No, but people use it all the time and like in a way that's not meant to be derogatory.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, when I was growing up, I used halfy like that. Oh my God, such an uncomfortable moment. But I have this moment where I was still figuring out my own mix and was still like very heavy in my white self and white side and had like almost no awareness. And so I was at this party and I was really excited to meet other mixed folks. And I saw this person, I could just see her instantly. And I walked up to her and I was like, oh my God, are you a halfy too? And the way this girl looked at me, she was like, fuck did you just say to me?
How old are you?
It wasn't that long ago. Like it was literally like 4-something years ago. Like it was.
Okay, we all have those moments.
It was
You've
bad.
grown a lot.
And I think she didn't realize that I too was mixed.
You're right. You're like,
So first she was just kind of like,
worse.
excuse me. And then we ended up standing in a huddle of like 4 or 5 other mixed and Asian immigrants and just like chatting about it. But I went in that instance assuming that all other mixed folks would be fine with the word halfie when I learned that it's quite derogatory. So that was very embarrassing. And like there's I hold a lot of shame in a lot of behavior like that from growing up because I was just like really poorly educated on whether or not that was fine.
How do you feel about racial slurs? Because obviously, like being part of a specific minority group, a lot of the time you're able to like reclaim racial slurs. What's your experience with that?
It really depends on which one. Yeah. And so like the first one that comes to mind is chink, which like even saying that feels heavy.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, like I was actually never called a chink, but I was in presence of that word being used a lot by a very specific person I knew. It's never happened directly towards me, so I imagine that feels like very different. And yet when you hear that, it's like that's just disgusting. The only instance I have of that is like not even race really, but I was called a redneck when I was in grade 3 because I told someone I was from Kansas.
Yeah.
Not the same, and yet like just as shitty. And so, yeah, I haven't reclaimed. The only thing I've reclaimed is like
I fully reclaimed redneck.
yeah. I have reclaimed a lot of the like words like halfie and Asian and like that kind of area of words, which has also led me to the symbol of egg, which I play with a lot of my art.
Can you quickly talk a little bit more about the symbolism of eggs in your art for those of us who are not familiar?
I had a really big moment over COVID where I painted my first sunny side up egg piece. And it made me think a lot about why I kind of associate with this term. Like that was something some people called me growing up, but more often than not, it was whitewashed, bleach, Wasian, halfie. Egg is similar to banana, Oreo, coconut, where people take essentially some sort of food and they use the skin of the outside and the inside to talk about race. And so if you were South Asian, people would call you a coconut. If you were Black, people called you an Oreo because if they saw your proximity to whiteness as
like
something
if you're Black and grew up in a white neighborhood.
Exactly. And or if the way you talked, like they would just label you that. And there was a humor element instead of like a heavy slur, they used a humor element to make it okay. And so egg was like that for me. I know that you're Asian, but when it only pops up in math or like I think you're a shitty driver, I'm going to bring it up. But every other time I'm going to treat you as a white kid, which is oddly not the average Asian immigrant experience. More often it's the flip. I have only had 2 people that I've met in the last 4 years of using this term in my work that have identified with that word openly and said like their mom used it to describe them or like their sibling or like something like that. But essentially I use it to talk about having that sense of bothness. So when someone used it, they meant to insinuate that my Asian culture and my Asian spirit is only on the inside of me. When yet, if you don't take it so literally, an egg has both. And so that's where I kind of took it, where I am fully both at all times, just in the same way an egg is. Now I play with like really intricate meaning into like everything. I'm very intentional. So like I have a very specific egg print design I do. Every one of those is hand drawn and hand painted because they're all original and unique. Everyone has their own specific perspective that dictates what they look like and how their world is. And yet we all are perceived the same. And so that's why I like doing that print because it talks about this simultaneous uniqueness and commonality between all of us.
So this next subtopic that we want to jump into is really around identity formation and advice. I'm kind of wondering for our first question, let's make it kind of gay. How has your experience being mixed race helped your understanding of your queerness?
So much. I painted the first Sunny Side Up egg maybe a month after I came out as genderqueer. I knew I was bisexual or like pansexual is what I use now for my whole life because I didn't think it was weird. It's just like, I just am. Everyone's attractive. Great. Yeah. But the gender element really came out during the summer of 2020. The duality that I experienced with my race allowed me to really understand duality in terms of my sexuality and gender. And that really helped like gather a sense of confidence around both of them because I already knew what that felt like. I just didn't have the words. And so coming out, it was just like learning language and learning how to communicate about it to others, try and express that sense of simultaneous bothness. And that Yeah, it really led me there. And I was really thankful for that because now I can approach everything with that mindset. It's like, okay, so everything is both. I'm always two at the same time in like all of these different areas. Okay, what does that look like? What does that mean? It means very specific, unique experiences. It means understanding and also simultaneously not fully understanding experiences of many different kinds of people in the elements in which we connect. And so I meet a lot of bisexual or genderqueer Asians. And that immediate connectivity of like, okay, you have bothness, but now you have double bothness in the way that I have double bothness. How cool. Or like triple bothness if they're also genderqueer. And it's like, wow. That's very special to find because that sense of displacement occurs in now more than one of your communities. And so like, sure, like I'll go to New Ho Queen and have my experience of being Asian and my experience of being queer. But I feel very white in the space. I feel very straight in the space sometimes because my partner is a man. And so like these added elements of feeling awkwardness around those apply in all these additional communities as well. And so that sense of wholeness is something I've really struggled with because it occurs in so many different areas of my life.
Over time, do you think you've found a sense of like self-understanding and like a sense of, I guess, like calmness and being at peace in your identity?
Absolutely, I have. And it really has been conversations with other folks that experience it. And so like the one that I've probably had the most recently was actually a mural coordinator that I sat down with at some random event, Korean and Russian, and born in Uzbekistan. I was like, wow, similar in the sense of like, okay, so you're not in your birth country and you have two different other countries that you connect with on top of that, and you have a sibling and you're white passing. Wow, cool. And so we talked a lot about those moments, and she was saying like, oh, I actually feel very disconnected from my sister because she's more white passing than I am. So she actually doesn't feel Asian at all. And I was like, oh my God, I have the same thing. Like I have a sister who feels very disconnected from her Asian culture as well. And it's become a bit of a disconnect for us as well because in the past years, I've really wanted to embrace my Asian identity and find ways to connect with it as much as possible. And hers is a little bit different because my sister was born in Canada.
Yeah.
And so are these added elements of like, okay, how do I fit? How do I belong? Where is it for me? And conversations with my sister have helped, conversations with my partner who's Cantonese and Finnish have helped, conversations with anyone who's mixed and specifically queer. Because anytime someone reflects an experience I've had before, I feel like I belong in that conversation by itself. Yeah. And so when I make art, I often try and make it about those themes so that folks can find that experience of belonging in that place, in that work, and like be reminded that like everything you went through is like perfectly normal, perfectly fine, and whole. I think that's something that makes people really struggle with is like
you're
there's
not missing
this
anything.
Yeah, like I'm not a half. I'm not two halves. I'm one whole.
Yeah.
Of both.
That's the beauty of community and just like finding that sameness. Obviously, like there is so much greatness to like experiencing people of different experiences, but finding your people in your community is very healing and like always will be.
Do you have any other piece of advice that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I do. And I think it's actually quite, maybe not specific to Asian folks, but given Asian culture, that's where I'm coming from. Do your best to talk to your parents. It is terrifying. It is really uncomfortable. And they can make you feel very small and minimized. And yet, although all of that is true, the connection that I've built and the understanding of myself that I have now because I've started those conversations has been very helpful because it allowed me to remember that they're both human and they both tried very hard and that they want the best for me and that they do see parts of the person that I am. And the more that I have conversations with them, the more that they can see those. And that's not the same for everyone because like there are points in which people have with their parents that make it relationships that are no longer worth keeping, which is entirely valid and quite common. And yet with Asian folks, there's a sense of continuous deep respect for your elders and your family. And that's something I had a lot of distance from growing up and something that I really want to work on, like respecting my mother better as the person that she is. And that's very hard at times. And yet I love her very much and I love my dad very much. And I really want to work on building that relationship with the person that I am so that it's not as weird, I guess, when they come across other mixed folks or other queer folks. They have a base understanding of me and they have this base understanding that they can take into the rest of their lives. And that ripple effect, I think, is really strong.
Yeah.
What are some of the most valuable questions that you've asked them that has really helped you?
I think for my dad, what is preventing you from understanding what I'm saying right now? what is the exact barrier? What is making you feel defensive or frustrated around this topic? Is there a different way that we can approach this so that you can understand it better? And actually, I think that would also apply to my mom, specifically with her being a language barrier. Describing queerness has been very complex because she doesn't have that base understanding of like all of those words. And so just trying to meet them halfway and asking questions so that I can meet them halfway, and remembering that like as much as my experience is important and valid and like I need to communicate that, they are, at least for my parents, they're doing the best they can and they want to do it as much as they can, and yet it's very hard for them sometimes. So that's been something I'm navigating.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kels, for coming and sharing your experience and advice with us. We really appreciate you, and I know that lots of our listeners will relate. So it was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been like wanting to do this for so long, so this is very cool and I'm excited to be a part of it.
So thank you all so much for tuning in. And if you liked the episode, make sure to leave a like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out. And if you are listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And if you want to check out more on the queer immigrant experience, make sure to check out this video right over here. That's everything that we have for you today. And until next time, peace.